Hey, if you're listening to this episode and benefiting from it, could you help me reach more like-minded listeners by rating it 5 stars? It only takes 2 seconds. Just pause this episode and click on the stars. Thank you. Welcome to the Life Affairs podcast. This is a place where we share life experiences and the many lessons learned by just living. Join me to immerse ourselves and take a closer look at the stories that shaped and defined us. Just remember, there's no judgment and a lot of understanding on today's episode of the Life Affairs podcast. I'm telling the story from a feminine perspective because this type of conversation often happens between women, and I haven't heard about it as much from the other genders. In many cultures, we women are raised to become people pleasers. It can become dangerous, even leading to situations as severe as molestation. And yet, we are taught to do what is right for others, often at our own expense. We grow up believing that people-pleasing is the only way to make others love us and never leave us. Personally, I never considered myself a people-pleaser, or at least I like to think I am not. I have a strong sense of self and often makes me resist the pressure to conform to others' expectations. My stance has always been, this is me. Take it or leave it. Of course, life isn't as black and white as I'm making it sound, and there are nuances to this. For example, while I don't fall in love easily and maintain firm boundaries when I do, my approach can change. When I fall in love, I might find myself doing whatever it takes to ensure that the other person loves me, wants me, and stays with me. This is where people-pleasing tendencies can sneak in, even when I pride myself on being independent. But, thankfully, my life doesn't evolve around this. And despite other struggles, people-pleasing isn't one of my major challenges. However, I recognize a form of people-pleasing in my behavior as a mother. There's certain tendency to put my children's need ahead of my own, and I'm happy to say that I'm aware of this and actively working to mitigate it. Looking around at my family and friends, I see people-pleasing happening frequently, and it often looks unhealthy from a certain distance. It can appear toxic and frustrating, not just for the person doing it, but also for the one on the receiving end. I take the Middle Eastern culture as an example, where people-pleasing is particularly pronounced. Women in this culture often find themselves pleasing their husbands, children, in-laws, and friends. It's so ingrained that it looks like a cultural issue. But it's not just a cultural phenomenon, as I think. People-pleasing can also be deeply personal, rooted in our fears and experiences. This brings me to someone who embodies this struggle in a very real and relatable way. To talk about this topic is my guest Marina Pearson. She was a people-pleaser, driven by a fear of abandonment in her romantic relationships. She shares how her fear of rejection and judgment led to self-abandonment, codependency, and burnout. By trying to fit in and please others, she lost touch with her true desires and repressed her authentic self. She shares how her fear of rejection and judgment led to self-abandonment, codependency, and burnout. By trying to fit in and please others, she lost touch with her true desires and repressed her authentic self. She eventually realized she could embrace her manifestor human design profile, live authentically, and still be loved. Marina authored 2 books, the bestseller Goodbye My Ex and The Joy of Being. And today, she guides other women to break free from people-pleasing and manifest the loving relationships and fulfilling life they deserve. The conversation is raw, authentic, and very open. Marina has not shied away from telling it like it is. How did it dawn at you that you are a people pleaser and how it's impacting the changes you are making in your life?
I started looking into development and into evolution after my first divorce, and that was back in 2007. I started with something called imago therapy, which was all about patterns in relationships, but nobody ever coined it as people pleasing. It was just certain types of things that I thought I needed, certain ways of attracting a certain type of man, and it was all to do with reflection of your parents, needs that weren't met, and that sort of thing. And then I moved into the ascension route, which was very much life, we're all one. We create everything via our thought. We all have this capacity for insight. I was on that journey for about 10 years. So it never really touched on individualization. It never really touched on my own specific journey. It talked about universal principles, which have been incredibly helpful in terms of how I create my experience. And it's like a feather bed to understand that I'm creating my own experience through my own thinking. And everything that I feel is coming through me versus being created from the outside in. It was extremely helpful to understand and know that. Nevertheless, I had a blind spot, which is I'm super expressive. I'm very good at expressing myself on paper, in terms of my writing, in terms of my voice, in terms of my acting and singing, all of that. And for many years, I worked in the music industry, so I was always surrounded by creatives. However, I had a blind spot, and that blind spot was my relationships with men, which was interesting because I couldn't figure it out. I was like, what? I'm super expressive. I'm super creative. What's going on? Why is it I attract all the crazies?
Because in your opinion, they were the crazies at that moment.
Yeah, of course. They were the crazy ones. I remember sitting in my living room one day and just going, what is it about me that attracts these sorts of men? I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't understand the dynamic because I was looking at it, why do I attract them versus why am I attracted to them? That was a different question that opened up a whole nother conversation in my narrative. I remember after a really, I was with somebody for about 4 months, and he broke it off with me, and it was devastating for me. And I went into a really dark place. And I started to recognize that every time I was, that a relationship was super intense and it was broken off, that I would really suffer quite, but in ways that actually weren't quite normal. And so I decided to explore something different to the ascension route that I'd been on. And then not only was I dealing with that, but then my ex-husband and I got into a huge fight. And it took us down a journey of courts and lawyers, custody battle, all at the same time. And I was dealing with both at the same time, and it was really, really intense. And when I was on this journey, I hired a coach, and she was actually really focused on insecure attachment. And I'd never heard of this before. I didn't know what it was, because I'd been on this ascension route where we're all one and we all create our experience through thought. And she said to me, I think you've got, there are definite insecure attachment patterns of behavior here. And so I started looking into this, and I realized that she was absolutely right, because I kept attracting men that were very much non-insecure, but they are non-committal in a lot of ways. So I would be needy and they would push back. And I started to realize that I had this insecure attachment that manifested itself in people pleasing. But I hadn't really understood that it was people pleasing that I was in. I just knew I had an insecure attachment. And from there, I started to understand relationship dynamics. And I started to realize, oh, wow. When they pull away, I get really needy. When they leave, it's like my world ends. And that's kind of, it was starting, that was a clue for me. And then when I was in this initiation of really reclaiming that part of myself, which was to be able to stand on my own 2 feet, to trust myself, to say no, to really honor my truth, and to really honor really what I wanted. None of these were concepts to me that were really alien. And I remember somebody saying to me, what do you want? What's aligned for you? And I was like, what does alignment mean? I have no understanding of this word. I was like thrown into, well, I don't know what my truth is, because I've never really been asked what that is. I didn't even know what that is for me, because I constantly been saying yes and wanting to appease and wanting to seek approval. It was a huge unraveling for me. When I got together with somebody else after all of this 6 months later, once again, I was like, oh God, I'm in trouble. And at the beginning of our dating, I could tell that I had all of this stuff coming up. I lent in, which, you know, in polarity worlds, women are meant to lean back. They're meant to let the masculine lead at the beginning. All of these rules and regulations, and I could feel myself getting really anxious and having to play it cool. It was just all really alien to me. And I remember having a conversation with my partner, because that was the beginning stages of my partner, who I've now been together with for 3.5 years. And saying to him, I find vulnerability really difficult. Like, I wasn't able to tell him how I was feeling. I started to understand that somehow there had been a massive amount of repression of my own authentic expression in my relationships with men.
Does this all fall in the realm of saying, no, I don't want to do this, or falls in sharing your feeling that you're scared of a breakup, daring say where is this relation going to, or saying something that he wouldn't like or agree with and he will withdraw from the conversation or even from the relationship?
Yeah, what it all boils down to is your fear of abandonment.
You want this to work no matter what, so they just don't leave.
I don't want to be on my own. Yeah, your fear of abandonment. So when you have an abandonment wound, usually it translates into weird and wonderful behaviors like people pleasing. And what happens as a result is that you look to the outside for validation and approval. You look to the outside for appreciation, and you look to the outside for safety, all of which are inside. All of these different pieces that you're looking for, each one of them has its own ways, patterns of behavior, but it also has implications as well. But at the time, I wasn't conscious of this. And so all I knew is that I was doing the very thing that needy little girls do at the beginning of any dating journey, which is being needy, getting really upset if he didn't call me back, pushing to see him more, not allowing him, me being the one to ask, what are we doing? Where are we going? How's this? And so at the end of the 6 months we were together, he ended it. And I was devastated, of course, because, of course, it triggered my abandonment wound even more. And I went back into a really dark place for a while. But it was during that time that I started to explore what I wanted. I was asked that question, what is it you want in a relationship? And I was like, well, I don't know. Just like, oh, I guess I'll know when I experience it. It was like, well, no, if you want to create and call in what you want, then you're going to have to do some work on that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that was like a big discovery for me. I'm like, oh, I can actually ask for what I want. And he's like, yeah. And then we started talking about alignment. And he said, one thing is to ask for what you want, but the other thing is to honor it.
How?
So one thing is to ask for what you want, which is like, I want a guy who. And then the other thing is when some guy shows up, but he doesn't actually have the quality you're asking for, do you honor it, or you just go, oh, fuck it, it doesn't matter actually. I'll take him anyway. At least I've got my own. That's what I mean by honor. So it's almost like your standards. Some people would call it standards. It was so funny because this is during the 6 weeks. And during that 6 weeks that him and my partner and I weren't together, I got clear on what I wanted. I got clear on what I wasn't okay with and what hadn't worked for me in the relationship, that wasn't working for me. And what wasn't working for me allowed me then to get clear on what I wanted. Because I was like, I don't want that, so I want this instead.
Guided by your coach, you have found what you need to work on to become better in your relationship. It must have been very intense to work on all of this in just 6 weeks.
It was, but I was in it to win it. I was literally like, I have to do this work now. And it wasn't just him. I then went in, during that time, I decided to go into polarity work as well, where it was about understanding the masculine, feminine dynamics, all alien to me at the time.
It's called polarity?
They call it polarity work. So basically it's understanding feminine, masculine dynamics. What allows for a masculine man to be attracted to you as a feminine woman? What are the qualities? But also the big discovery for me was understanding that I would overwork for love. I realized that I was doing all the things to overwork for love, when in actual fact, if I wanted to attract a guy, or I would want to feel attracted to a man that I didn't have to overwork for, that it would be a really different experience. And that would look something like not looking after him, that I would have that provision, but not all the time. Just I could feel that he's there for me in like my rock, but also committed to the relationship in a way that I don't think I'd ever actually experienced before, but also was masculine in his ways, like the provider, the hunter, just that sort of commitment, the presence. And I'd always been attracted to feminine men, mainly feminine, and also men I would probably end up having to rescue or look after.
Oh, like you're mothering them.
Yes. The sort of the big aha moment for me was when I realized that when I turned it around, it's like, why am I attracted to these types of men? Why am I attracted to these men versus why are they attracted to me? Once again, it was coming back to the I. The minute I was like, okay, why am I attracted to them?
How did you find your ex, who's now your partner? How did you find him back in this 6 weeks? And what did he see in you changing so that he wanted to be on this relationship again?
Well, it was magical, really, because I remember that I was on the beach talking to my coach and saying to him, I'm done. Because I'd been pining over him and I'd been really suffering over it and I'd been having a really bad time on it. And he's like, well, why do you want to be with somebody that doesn't want to be with you? And I'm like, well, that's a great question. And I'm still here figuring that one out. And I wrote to him and I said, I think like I feel different today. I feel like I don't feel like if me and my partner don't ever get back together again, or I just feel like I'm ready to move on now. I'm really clear on what I want. Anyway, I got a message from my ex, my partner, my current partner. And he said to me, "How are you?" And I'm like, I'm great, thanks. How are you? And well, it opened up a whole conversation. And I could feel, I was like, something's different here. Something's really different, because we'd been in contact during that time, but he was really into the conversation. I was traveling that day with my son, and we were kind of texting, and he was like, "Oh, I've just got to go do this. Don't leave. I'm going to come back." So we were texting for a good 2 or 3 hours, and I was just like, "No, this is not normal." Oh, shit. Does he want to get back together? Because it suddenly dawned on me that this is actually what was going on. I thought to myself, if he did ask, if he did open up, if he did want to get back together, how would things have to be different? And so the following day, he wrote to me and he said, "I miss this." And I said, "Well, okay." And I said, what else?" He's like, "I miss you." And then it opened up a conversation. He said, "I want you back, and I'm sorry, I've made this huge mistake, and la, 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 la." And I said to him, "That's all well and good, but you really hurt me. For this to work, this is what I need from you." So suddenly it was me going, what is it I want? This is the only way that I'm willing to come back. And are you in?
But it wasn't in a needy way.
No. This now is coming from a place of, for this to work for me, I need this. Are you in? Are you in agreement to this? Well, that was the short version.
You're finally able to say, if you agree with me, we can be in this relationship, and if not, fine, we go our separate ways. You were not clinging on him because you are afraid of being abandoned.
We all do this to a certain degree. We project our unmet needs on something or somebody else. And when we do that, they feel it, especially the masculine. It feels it. It's like, oh no. And he's a super independent guy. So he's a bit of a free spirit. And, I've got a needy dog. I've got a needy dog and it drives me nuts. And so I was like thinking, well, if I had a needy partner, it would just drive me absolutely mental. I wouldn't like that either, actually. And so, but I knew that there were certain things that had to be in place for it to work, because obviously the old rendition of it wasn't working, not for me or for him. And there was a lot of time for me to reflect on the things that hadn't worked, the things that weren't working, that had to change for it to be a relationship that I think both of us wanted to be in. Now, that was me sharing and expressing my truth and expressing the desires that I had. Honoring those, that was a journey. That was definitely a journey, because I had to move through a lot of wounding around my expression to be able to share what was going on for me, to be able to say no to things, to be able to be vulnerable. Because ultimately what I've realized this journey is really about is women sharing their heart with the masculine in a way that feels deeply vulnerable, but also deeply uncomfortable. Because vulnerability is, I'm here and I'm naked and I need to share this with you because you hurt me. I'm here to share. And so that's something that I found really difficult, because I'd been taught to protect myself. I'd been taught to shut my heart down. I'd been taught, because people pleasing isn't an open-hearted way of being. It's a protection mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. It's an incredibly ingenious one. If I do this, then I can survive in the world. If I do this, then I can be loved by you. So vulnerability is the opposite of that. Vulnerability is no agenda. I'm here opening my heart to you and telling you what's really difficult for me. I'm over here sharing what I need from you. I'm over here sharing how this makes me feel.
There is some kind of, I don't know if sometimes we think that Men don't want to listen to our vulnerability because it's too much for them to take and they don't know what to do with it. How do you see this?
I love this question because I think vulnerability is very misunderstood. And my version of vulnerability isn't vulnerability. So some women think the vulnerability is being able to share all of the feelings. Reactivity is not vulnerability. So reactivity...
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so reactivity is blaming and shaming the other person. Being angry, being pissed, being needy. That's some people would classify that as being vulnerable because you're sharing how you're feeling. The way I see that is that's more reactivity. Vulnerability for me is sharing how you feel after you calm down.
Hey, if you're listening to this episode and benefiting from it, could you help me reach more like-minded listeners by rating it 5 stars? It only takes 2 seconds. Just pause this episode and click on the stars. Thank you. There's something I learned in my relationship. Not to react when I'm full of emotions and feelings. Give myself time to come back to it and know how to come back to it. And this is where I think you want to share.
Yeah, so that's not to say to have to hide it, because there have been times where I've got really angry or really upset and I'm able to come back to him to talk to him about, well, I'm not going to hide that I'm like that. And yet this is what I need from you when I'm in that place, which is to just either give me a hug, or if I storm out and I'm going for a walk, that's what I need, and for you to just be okay with that for now. It's the best thing for both of us. So usually what happens to me is that I get really angry. I can get really angry and I shut down. Nobody can get through that anger wall. I need some space and time to just calm the fuck down, breathe, and then just make sense of what just happened, and then be able to go back and communicate that. I'll give you an example. So we don't live together, right? He has a 14-year-old son. I've got a 9-year-old son. And we've decided that this is the best thing for our relationship for now. We live about an hour and 20 minutes away. And the reason why we're doing this is namely because of our children. And as a result, for our relationship. And it's working. So it's a wise decision for now.
Keeps the fire burning.
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, it does. So we were there for the weekend, and, he's very much like a man that wants to be in service of everybody. So when somebody asks him something, men are like that. Well, my man's like this, and I think most men are like this, is like when you ask something of them, they're like, okay, what do you need from me? Let me fix and solve that for you. And of course, there's lots of things going on. He's usually there with his son or on his own, and suddenly there is me, my son, and my dog. And everybody's needing something. And he wants to be of service to all of us in our own time. And this one particular weekend, he hadn't spent what he would have considered enough time with his son. He needed to connect with him. And we were supposed to be doing something as well. We hadn't got round to it. So I said to him, can we do this after lunch? And he just turned around and said something to me like, when are you leaving? Or I need to spend time with my son, or that's just not going to happen. But it came from a real place of like aggravation and frustration. And it just went straight through me. it just felt like, where did that come from? And why is that addressed to me? And I just felt really unwelcomed in that place, in that space. And I said to my son, we're going. It took me about a week to just unravel it for myself. Then I was like, okay, what was going on? And I realized something. And I realized that when he gets like that, it's because he doesn't understand how to ask for what he needs. It's not because of me. It's because he's not identified what he needs and he's not able to express it. Therefore, it comes out all blur. I get the brunt of that. And I was like, okay, well, I've seen this before. I've experienced this before. It's not the first time. So this is something he needs that he's not getting. We need to talk about it. So following week, he comes down and I said, look, I want to talk about what happened because I see this, that it's not just the first time this has happened. And what I've come to see is that when you get this way, it's because you need something that you're not getting. Is that right? And he was like, yes. And I said, okay. So I was I could see that was what was going on. And this is how it affects me. So that I'm explaining this to you, that is why I left. That's why I was angry, because I don't think it's particularly fair that comes through you onto me when actually it can be done in this way. What I need from you then is this. So then I said, look, what I've realized is that we won't stay for as long as we have been. So there's a big difference between making lunch before on a Sunday rather than not, because then he needs to go and take his son on Sunday evening and that sort of thing. So what I realized is that when I'm able to see what's going on and not clouded by all of my emotion, because we are emotional beings, women are. You can't deny that. So it's like, okay, well, I'm an emotional being. No, just accept it and go, okay, well, things are going to come up. I'm going to be triggered. You're going to be triggered. We're both going to be triggered. But the best way to handle it is for me to take distance, calm down and come back to you and go, okay, this is what was going on for me at the time. I want you to understand this so that you get to see more of who I am, but also for us to figure things out when things like this show up. See, I never used to talk about these sorts of things because it felt like it was too dangerous, or if I did, it would trigger and then we'd go into have another argument, and that it wasn't safe.
From what you're saying, if you were still in the old pattern of people pleasing, you would go into an argument, it will not feel safe, you both will be turning in circle, each one trying to prove himself or herself. It escalates, and then you will feel like you screwed up and you have to, make it up for him, for yourself, to go back into the normal mood.
Right, exactly. And it would have been my fault. What did I do? What did I do? What did I do? What did I do? Me. I'm going to do something to make up for it. I'll give you an example of the reiteration of this maybe about 2 years ago, where the same thing happened, actually. And I acted completely differently. I bought him a flower. I bought him a cactus, actually. I'm sorry, it was my fault. And then we left. And then the next day I called him and he was really rude to me on the phone. He spoke to me really badly because I wanted to know what was going on. And he wasn't ready to talk. And what would happen in there would be like, I would then feel so bad that I did something wrong. He then phoned me back and said, I'm sorry, don't ever let anybody like that ever speak to you again in that way. He had phoned me to tell me that versus me being the one to tell him, you do not speak to me in this way. Yes. It's not okay.
He didn't want the flower.
No. Well, it's so thank you for that. Thank you for that question, because there's definitely been a difference in the way that I handle things now with him and the way I communicate things with him.
in this experience with you being with your partner and guiding him, because he did not have the guidance, you had a coach and you worked on yourself to find your truth, what you want. He didn't have a coach. He's lucky that you are guiding him to dig further into what he wants. But when you talk about polarity and relationship between masculine and feminine, can you tell me more about the masculine side and how do you see it and how we women can understand it better?
When men are wired very differently to us. They're very sort of one-focused, and now I'm talking about men that have in their masculine. I mean, there's going to be a whole gamut of realities within the masculine. There's going to be men that have done the work. There's going to be men that haven't done the work. There's going to be men who are more feminine, who are more inclined to be more feminine. But let's just sort of be generic for a moment, because I feel that that's what kind of where the question has gone. So what I have realized is that men love to be appreciated. They love to be appreciated. What kills a relationship is when they feel they are being criticized. They just want to know that they're a good man and that they're doing a good job and that they're winning with you. I think as women, we need to make it easy for men to win with us. And I as I've been talking, I've had this image. There's a great comedian, who has this sketch, and it's brilliant. And it's called the nothing box. And so men have this thing called the nothing box. They can literally shut everything out and just not think about anything. And they have different compartments and they don't touch each other. So they're like football, sport box, the cooking box, the child box, whatever box they have, it doesn't touch. Whereas women, we have all the boxes together, they all interlink, and they spark each other off. So I'm sharing that with you just so that you understand how we're different. We're wired differently. Men don't want to talk about their problems, women do. When we get stressed, we want to talk. That actually reduces our cortisol. For men, it can actually elevate their cortisol. They usually just want to not talk about anything, or just switch off and play a game, or go and walk, or whatever it might be that they decide to do to just switch off. We're different in that way. And so it makes sense. They had to go out and kill bison, and we were in the kitchen, in the cave, talking to each other and stewing a pot. So we get to talk, they get to be very one focus, like I'm hunting a bison. And this guy was talking about the complaints that most women have are, he just doesn't listen to me. And he said, well, usually with a man, you've got to tell him about 3 times. The first time he's in his nothing box. And so he's like, there is nothing going on out there. He's just literally in his own little world. And then the second time he might hear hang on. And the third time he might go, right, okay, she said something. It seems important. Let me just
box it.
By which time she's frustrated and angry because he hasn't paid her any attention. And so he would go out, he's a pastor, and he would go out and he would go to these, speak to women after his sermons and that sort of thing. And they would say, I'm so fed up because he never listens to me. And he's like, well, how many times have you asked him to do that thing that you've asked him to do? Once. And he goes, well, you've got to ask him at least 3 times. Third time it will go in. I thought this is brilliant because it really brought to life exactly what goes on. all we want is our man's presence. We want to feel like he's seen us, he's acknowledged us, he's present to us. That for the feminine system is so good. It makes us feel like, for me personally, when he leans into me and he's there and we're talking and he's listening and he's interested, it is such a turn on. So I tell him that. And he goes, hang on, that's something that she likes and that I get appreciated for. Let me do it again. Oh, and let me do it again. And by the way, let me do that again. That is tried and tested and it works. So at the beginning of the relationship, or like when I started to really understand this and learn this, I thought, well, I'm going to test this and see what happens. And it works. Appreciating your man is rocket fuel for them, because once again, they've got this checklist in their head. It's like, my partner has a checklist. It's like the win checklist. Oh, right, if I do this, I win with her. So tick, 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 tick. But if you don't tell them that, how the hell are they going to know?
Now that you gave the example of the bison, so I feel every time my husband will come in the room, I will imagine him carrying a bison, so I will appreciate it and thank him.
Tell them how much you appreciate what they've just done for you. Allows them then to realize that actually, if I do this again, I'll be appreciated again. And this just fuels this acts of service, the connection, and the feminine masculine dynamic. But for that, we have to get really good at asking for what we want. And I remember at the beginning of this relationship with me, he would say to me, just ask me what you want. And I'd be like, well, why can't he figure that out? Is he that thoughtless? Can't we be that thoughtful?
We all women fall into this trap of thinking.
Like, and so I used to resent it because I was like, well, why can't you just be thoughtful?
Read my mind.
Right. And then I realized, no, they're just wired differently. I have to tell him what I want, because then it's a sure win.
I would like to know, what's the method that you use to help other women find their truth, ask for what they want, and have a happier relationship with their partner?
I ran my first women's circle in September of last year. And what became apparent to me was that where women struggle is in their expression. And that's what I struggled with. And so I was like, well, maybe there's a place that we can start here. So I've called that first circle the Unshackled Expression Circle. And it was a 6-week circle where we got to explore what their desires are, what their truth is, how to honor and express that, what stops them from being able to share, but also their appreciation. Because one of the things that I realized was that I wouldn't appreciate my partner because I was like, well, he needs to go first. It was too scary for me. It's like, it's too vulnerable. Like, for me to appreciate him is way too vulnerable. What if he takes advantage of that? It was my wounded truth at the time. That's how I was viewing the world back then, was like, I don't want to go first. It feels too vulnerable, it feels too scary. If I am going to appreciate him, what if I don't get that back?
When the relationship is not really in a good place, where communication is possible, maybe in the beginning, this is a struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Especially if you are dating and you find it hard and you're listening to this and you're finding it hard and you struggle with this, then that's a clue. And if you still find it hard and you're in a relationship years later, that's a clue. It's relevant to who you are being in any given moment. That there was a part of me that wanted to be in that sort of relationship, that wanted to be seen, accepted, and heard. And it was something that really was important to me. And what was fascinating was that only in the last couple of years have I sort of delved into something called the gene keys and human design. And this is also forms as part of my work. And my radiance, the thing that keeps me really healthy, is being in a partnership. So for me personally, for others it might be sport, for others it might be something else. But for me, my radiance is intimacy. You can't have intimacy without being vulnerable. If you're not being vulnerable, then you don't have the intimacy. If you're afraid of vulnerability, then you're going to directly be afraid of intimacy.
Intimacy and vulnerability, like they are component of trust, feeling safe.
Where does that safety come from, you see? And so, I've discovered on this journey that when we don't feel safe, we don't express, or we may express, but we react. So it's not that we don't go into the vulnerability of it. When we look to the outside for appreciation, we usually overgive. I call this the searching triangle, when I'm searching out there for something that I can't give to myself, or it feels like I'm projecting an unmet need on someone else. For the woman to be able to allow herself to receive and be provided for from the masculine. And they want to give, they want to be of service.
Having this conversation brings me to ask you, do you think maybe in the future you would have a model helping mother raising boys? I feel so much has to do with our upbringing or raising girls and boys, not specifically boys. It's how we raise also our kids. I'm very conscious with my daughters and with my son to not accept that they do things towards me as a people pleaser. I do act like this towards them. They get annoyed and I learn not to do it. But I also like to teach them not to do this with me because I don't want them to do it for themselves with the strangers or with a partner. Do you see yourself growing in this area?
That's a great question. For now, I'm really focused on this. It may well be an evolution of that. But I learn a lot from my son in terms of how I am with my partner is how I am with him. So I appreciate him for the things that he does. I ask him to do things to help me because first of all, it's just him and I do need the help. But I also then am realizing that while I give, I also want him to learn to understand what it is to give to, and for me and for the feminine to receive. So when he does something for me, I fully appreciate him. I live in a culture in Spain where mothers tend to be very overprotective of their sons. In doing so, they raise men who then expect that from their partners to do everything for them. And I don't want my son being brought up like that at all. I want him to understand and know that he is the provider. It's a partnership. There is a team. That it's not just about him having his dinner on the table, or that he also that he can do things for me too. He can make something for me, or when we go shopping, that he is the one to take the bags. I'm very sensitive to that because I see that how I am with him being his mum, the feminine, and how I educate him is how he will also then look after the next his first girlfriend.
I love this. I feel this is our responsibilities as mothers. When you describe the culture in Spain, it's the same culture. I come from Lebanon, and men grow to look for another mother. They will call her wife. And they are needy. Yeah. They don't have any insight. And women are people brought up as people pleaser. And I'm not generalizing. Don't mean to offend anyone. It's just how the culture is. And unless mothers listen to such a podcast and learn that they can do it differently, their children will face the same issues later.
I remember asking my partner, I think it must have been about 2 months in when we were together, that part of me was still there, like that sort of wanting to overgive. I remember him saying he loves his shirts, and I was like, ooh. So I asked him, I said, what size are you? Because I wanted to buy him one. And he went, nope. He went, no. And what I heard in his no was, I don't need mothering, thank you. I can buy my own shirt. And I loved that because I felt, well, first of all, what I saw in that was that I attracted a different kind of guy, and that I was attracted to a different type of man. He didn't need mothering at all, that he could take care of himself, all good. And that he'd taken care of himself before I had even arrived onto the scene. And this was me realizing that this is what it was like to actually be with a guy that was more interested in providing than it was about me providing all of the time. Like, we provide for each other in our own ways. The initial no for me was such like, it felt so good in my system, because it meant that I was like, oh, good. Like, there was a real sort of seeing of, oh, that was me wanting to, look after and overgive. And so, of course, I look after him. But what I mean by that is I look after him because it comes through me, not because I feel like if I don't, that somehow the relationship will end or whatever. But in terms of financial, that pattern's definitely gone. Like, I would usually pick men that I would have to rescue financially at some point or another.
Did it make you feel powerful?
I think so. I also feel that when we are living into our patterns, it's familiar. And it was like that familiar feeling. And then realizing that doesn't work for me. And so I realized that what I wanted was a man that was on the same level, that could look after himself, and that I wouldn't have to mother. Because it just, you said it, like the fact that we don't live together keeps the fire burning. Well, this does too. What I realized was that if I had to keep looking after, and I became the mum, that somehow that fire would burn out quite quickly. I wanted my king. I didn't want a child. I've already got one of those. I actually got 2. I've got a dog as well. So I wasn't really interested in looking for that anymore. But in order for me to attract a king, I had to become a queen.
Despite that this episode is about people-pleasing in romantic relationships, I believe it is packed with valuable insights that apply to every aspect of our lives where people-pleasing comes into play. If you're like me and have delved deep into self-reflection, you might find relatable stories about how people-pleasing has influenced your life in general. In the show notes, you will find a link to Marina's website where you can take the people-pleasing quiz to see where you stand on this matter. I thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends and family and ask them to subscribe. Leaving a rating and review on platforms like Apple Podcast can also help boost the podcast's ranking. Your support through word of mouth is greatly appreciated. If you feel I'm encouraging you to tell your story, contact me on rula@thelifeaffairspodcast.com. You will see my email in the show notes. I'll see you next time.